Hello and welcome to Game Changer Live, brought to you by connorscoaching.com. We created this show and our growing community to share with topics of positivity, coaching, personal development, mindset, and more. We go live because we believe that brings the most authentic and unedited version of ourselves to you each day. And we start on Wednesdays at 3:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time with occasional guests. Remember that together we inspire. My name is Daniel Connor, and I am the owner of Connor's Coaching. I'm a certified professional coach and a proud member of the International Coaching Federation, which means that I hold myself to the highest standards of ethics in coaching. Stuck people hire me when they're ready to discover a more fulfilling and purposeful life. And our vision is simple. We wake up each day to a slightly better version of ourselves in the mirror. And here today we are going to be talking about your brand. So when we're talking about brand, I think it's really useful to think about it in terms of how a business uses a brand, so that we can then decide how we want to use that on a personal level. And by the way, you'll notice that we now have a captioning metric, or a captioning option, and it looks like it's cutting off a little bit. I'll fix that in the future. I apologize for it cutting off today, but I wanted this to be more accessible to everyone. So when we're looking at brand, what is a brand? Well, it's a set of identifiable traits that distinguish one thing from another thing. In a business, it would be your logo, your trademarks, and your name. But for most businesses, it goes deeper, or hopefully it goes deeper than that. And it goes into color choices, philosophy, psychology, the font choices, the rules that they use and that they follow, who your audience is, what your tone of voice is, and your culture. So, an example would be the Connor's Coaching brand. I can use my own personal brand as an example here without any words. You can actually see our logo at the bottom of the video on, let's see, it's on this side now. And you can see from that our colors are teal and green. I chose those purposefully because they're soothing and hopeful and fresh and clean, at least in my mind. And we choose visuals that are water-based because they speak to my soul. And I prefer images and simple fonts when I'm presenting. So I'm using Roboto font, which is a Google font that's free for use. When I show up for my business, I am authentic and vulnerable, live and unedited. I'm outlined, but not scripted. I have a social media presence that I purposefully curate under the hashtag gamechangerlive, all one word. And when we post on social media, we do so on 4 different accounts, 4 different account pages across 2 different platforms, LinkedIn and Facebook currently. We're about to launch short video, which we're going to be launching on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, and probably Instagram, although I have to admit I'm a little behind the times when it comes to social media. And you can see from the, I'm going to just show up the returning screen just for a second so that you can see our logo for the channel. So you saw the G for Game Changer Live. It's very similar to the C, the double C's for Connor's Coaching that you can see on this page. When we choose words in our platforms, we choose to avoid you phrases, as in you do this and you think this. I may do that in my verbal, but I try not to do that in my written. And I also try to avoid advice posts. When I talk on my posts, I focus on a tone of positivity, mindset, and more. And we have catchphrases for both Game Changer and Connor's Coaching. For Connor's coaching, it's our vision is simple. Each day we get to see a better version of ourselves in the mirror. And for Game Changer, it's together we inspire. When you think about your personal brand, it's what you do to differentiate yourself from everyone else. Now, you are infinitely different from everyone else on earth, and yet similar. You have to do something to differentiate yourself, to stand out from the crowd, to signal to other people that you are worthy of being in their tribe. We do this naturally and subconsciously all the time. It's part of our culture, it's part of our society, it's part of our humanity. We have personality, we have voice, we have tone, we have the way we dress, we have our actions, our attitudes, and our behaviors. And hopefully, those are consistent with what you say in your words. And those are especially true for the words in your personal brand that are truisms, things that you bring up frequently, that you believe are true. You may notice that I have certain truisms that come up a lot on this show. For example, no one wakes up to be the villain in your story. That's a truism that I truly believe, and I remind myself on it on a regular basis. Because I do not want to find myself treating someone else like my villain, because that means that I'm the victim. I'm not the hero. And so it's really important that those words are consistent with your actions and behaviors, because that's how people know that you are being authentic. But even more so, we have a kind of sixth sense when it comes to how people are behaving that is consistent with the way that they actually think, believe, or behave. We call that part of our authenticity as well. So your thoughts are hopefully also consistent with those truisms and with the words that you say and with the actions and attitudes that you present. And then the other thing I want to bring up about your brand, and I'm realizing there's just this huge wall of text. So this is a new thing. It's an experiment. I think it could be a little bit better. I'll work on the subtitling in the future, but this is a big step for me. Um, but I want to talk about code switching. So code switching is something that you may hear related to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion around minority cultures. Things like how Black people might talk differently to other Black people when they're alone, but when they get around white people, they have to shift their language to fit in, to be culturally appropriate. The way that gay men talk to each other, for example, is vastly different than the way that gay men might talk to straight men, for example. That's code switching. But when we're talking about brand, it can also be a conscious choice of how you show up. Just like the way that I show up for YouTube in Game Changer Live is slightly different from the way that I show up in my coaching business of Connor's Coaching. There is a type of code switching that can happen based on the audience or the environment that you find yourself in. And that can be a conscious choice when we're talking about branding. And if all of this sounds like a lot, it is, because you're a lot. There is a lot to you. And when we're talking about brand, we're talking about you and who you are. So with code switching, you could show up differently when you're with your parents. You could show up differently when you're at church or in your professional environment at work. How about how you show up at home with your kids or with your spouse? Each of those could be a brand decision that's conscious. And that might be something you're missing out on. And the reason that we want this is because people really they're magnetized, they gravitate towards people's why, towards a brand's why. We trust, for example, a lot of us trust Apple products because they have a brand that is consistently high quality, or at least that's the brand that they represent. And hopefully their actions and their words match. How do you want to show up? How trustworthy is your brand? Do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you speak in a way that's consistent with your purpose, with your audience, and with your message? What measurements, rules, or processes are in place that help you enforce your own brand of how you show up to the people that matter in the places that you want to be? So, when we're looking at this, let's break it down into a couple of big categories: the visual and the voice. We're going to start with the visual. So, the visual would be your body language, your grooming, and your clothing choice. What are you saying with what you choose to wear? Um, when we're looking at body language, this actually fits into both voice and visual, but it's a visual representation of what you're trying to say, what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to put across. And it can be inconsistent with the other things in your life. If you're closed off like this because your fingers are cold, it can also subconsciously set across a message that you're closed minded, that you don't want to hear what someone else says. And being conscious of that and consciously choosing how you want your body language to show up in different environments could be a game changer. Pun intended. Now, with the other side of this, the voice, this is more than just your speaking voice, by the way. When we're talking about this, we're talking about your spoken words, your written words, your social media presence, the pictures you post online, the favorite colors that you post with or choose, the color palette you choose for your clothing. I choose a lot of blue clothing because I like the way it looks on me. Your body language also shows up in your voice because, again, it needs to be consistent with the other things that are coming out of it. It kind of crosses the line. And we also have tonality and tone, which are slightly different things. Do you speak in a positive and uplifting way, or are you a bit of a downer? Do you have an excited tone to your voice, an animated tone to your voice? Now, every brand has cardinal points to their brand or cardinal directions for their brand. These are the mission, the purpose, the principles, and the values that the business believes in. They're the why of the business. And the same is true with your personal brand. You're going to have your own mission, your own purpose, your own principles, and your own values. And hopefully, everything is consistent. The way that you act, the way you behave, the way you dress, the way you talk is going to be consistent with those cardinal points of your brand. If you went into any business that exists, big businesses out there, and asked to see their vision or values, their core values, for example, almost all of them would say something around accountability. The reason for that is no one trusts a liar. Accountability is all about doing what you say you're going to do. Is that part of your brand? Do you want to be trusted by others? If so, one of your cardinal points is probably accountability. But are you measuring it? Are you making sure that you're following through on it? How about authenticity? We are talking about branding here. And we'll talk a little bit about authenticity here in a second, but are you authentically you? Or are you wearing a costume and cosplaying as someone else? And then finally, when we're talking about personal brands, there are three things that I want people to consider. I would prefer if people would consider these three things. And that is your vision of the future, the story you're carrying from your past, and the actions that you choose in the present. Your attitude and your perspective. And for a moment, I just really want to talk about that attitude and perspective because they're so essential to my form of coaching. I am master practitioner of the Energy Leadership Index, which is an assessment of attitude and of perception. It's basically a way of measuring your consciousness in the way that you live your life and your awareness of your surroundings, of how you choose to show up. If you choose the victim mode, or if you default to the victim mode, is another way of thinking about it, especially in times of stress. And when we say victim mode, we're really talking about a specific group of hormones that can appear when we're in great times of stress to encourage us to fight, flight, or flee. There's a purpose and a reason that humans are born with the victim mindset. It is not an evil thing. There's not something wrong with you if you find yourself in the victim mindset. It is an attitude and a perspective that sometimes feels required or it feels natural to be in, but it does not need to be that way. It is a choice. And there are reasons to be in that are perfectly normal and healthy and rational, like you're injured, or you need someone to help you, or the building is on fire. Reasonable reasons to be in the victim mindset because it gets you moving and it keeps you alive. But when you're talking about being in a business meeting where your boss says something without thinking about it, being the victim in that mode tends to be less effective, and yet we choose to do it, either consciously or unconsciously. And that is part of your brand and being aware of it, being aware of when you naturally gravitate towards those lower states of energy, towards those victim modes or aggressor modes, which is another level in the Energy Leadership Index. Uh, Being aware of those is huge to improving your brand. So I promised that I wanted to talk about authenticity, and so I'm going to do that. So a lot of people, scratch that. I can imagine that people might hear all of this and think, okay, so you want me to wear a costume and dress up like someone I'm not. And no, that is, first of all, you be you. I don't get to tell you how to behave, or it wouldn't be appropriate. First of all, I've never walked in your shoes. I am never going to be the best version of you that you could be. I'm going to try to be the best version of me. And that's going to be completely different. When we're talking about brand, we're talking about what differentiates you from other people. And you are already unique. Being conscious of that means choosing a way that is authentically you, so that the way that you show up in the world isn't a mask. It isn't a costume. It is authentic. And when we're looking at this, it's really important to know or to be able to determine what the difference between the intrinsic and the extrinsic is. So, what do those words mean? So, intrinsic means what's natural or essential, what is you, without a doubt. If you were born 30 years from now, you would still have those traits. What is extrinsic oftentimes feels like it's intrinsic because it's subconscious. But those are the things that are not essentially you, that you grew up into, that are patterns that you've adopted, that are habits that you've formed. And these are the branding opportunities that are the easiest to change and also the most challenging to start. These would be things like what you choose to wear, the tone of voice that you pick. You can't pick your voice. Your voice, that most people hate hearing their voice and recorded. I've had to listen to so many of my own episodes, I've gotten used to it, but most people hate to hear their own voice. You can't actually change your own voice easily. That is an intrinsic thing. It doesn't mean it can't be changed. And when you're code switching, you may find that your voice changes. When I'm talking to other men, especially straight men, I tend to talk in a deeper tone, in a more confident tone. And that is an extrinsic choice because that's a tone. But the voice that I'm talking with, regardless of whether I'm talking with in the code with other, code switching with other gay men or code switching talking to straight men, the voice is the same. It's the tone that changes. The intrinsic voice, the extrinsic tone. And so that is part of the authenticity conversation, is what is intrinsically you? What is unquestionably or undeniably you? And whittling that down and deciding on the others as a conscious choice is what a personal brand is all about. Choosing how those extrinsic qualities show up for you and how you want them to show up, so that the person in that mirror that you get to see tomorrow is the person that you want to see tomorrow. Um, so to kind of round this down, because this is a long episode already, and we haven't even gotten to the point where I get to tell you how I would go about doing this. I want to talk about metrics. So when you're talking in business about anything that you want to control, that you want to define, and that you want to be conscious of, especially when we're talking about accountability and authenticity, metrics are really important. That's measurements. How many of the things did you say that you were going to do did you actually do? That would be an accountability metric. An authenticity metric might be how true is the face you show the world versus the person you really are. Um, so really thinking about it in terms of that can really help set you up in a pattern of behavior that sets your brand up for success. That sets you up for success when you adopt that brand on a conscious level. I want to tell a quick parable of why branding is important, and I completely made these up based off of extreme measures, right? Of people that I've actually observed, but names are completely changed. If you think this is related to you, it probably isn't. None of these people would be watching my show. Um, and I've completely made up these. So these are parables. They're not real. But we're going to start with Bailey. So Bailey says things like punctuality is important. And Bailey is incredibly busy all the time and often runs a couple of minutes late, rushing into the meeting at the last minute, making apologies. Bailey says things like, I'm very even tempered. And yet, at times when you're talking to Bailey, you find that they blow up unexpectedly for no reason, or because you tread on something you didn't know about that bothered them. Bailey might say things like transparency and accountability are their core values. But when you look for Bailey, you can't figure out where she is, and you can't see the calendar, so you can't hunt them down, even though you need them. And when Bailey's in a meeting and makes an insensitive joke and someone gets their feelings hurt as a result of it, Bailey declares that people are just too sensitive these days when it's brought up. You could look at Bailey and make a lot of judgments about them. You could think, well, they're not very authentic. They're not taking actions or behaviors that are consistent with the words that they're saying. I would say that they have a thoughtless brand and that they have a lot of opportunity to improve. So, I did have a second analogy, but I'm going to drop it in in relation to the time because I really do want to get to the next section here, which is deciding what your brand is going to be. So the steps that you take. Now that you're thinking about it in terms of how you show up, of how you present yourself, of how you want to present yourself, of your environmental branding, of how you want to show up in different situations or different areas, um, start thinking about each day as an iteration of that brand rather than thinking about it as a failed opportunity if you make a mistake. Think about today as a learning opportunity to make tomorrow better. Take a look in the mirror and decide who you want to see there tomorrow. And then decide what do you need to do today to make that person real. And decide on the intrinsic versus extrinsic qualities of yourself. If you find yourself needing to work on the intrinsic, it's probably best to work with a professional who's experienced in that regards. For example, we talked about voice. If you don't like the way your voice sounds, there are coaches out there, not me, I'm not a voice coach, but there are coaches out there who can help people with speech impediments and voice qualities that they don't appreciate overcome those and change those over time. These are habits and they can be changed or corrected, but it's very difficult to do on your own. But when you're talking about the extrinsic, those are branding opportunities. What clothes do you choose to wear? What words do you choose to put out there on the social medias platforms that you're a part of? And then finally, the work. Weekly, create measurements that help decide whether or not you're successful on your brand. Now, a very simple example of this that everyone in Western culture probably can relate to is the swear jar. The swear jar is an example of a metric that's used to design to help you create a better brand for yourself in public. We already have this. We already think about things in this way. And so, what other metrics could you put into place that would help support you in the brand that you've decided to take on once you've decided what those extrinsic traits are and what you want them to look like? These would include the habits that you find yourself in. And habits are very difficult to break. By the way, it takes about 30 days to consciously break a habit and 30 days to replace it. So that's 60 days of consciously thinking about something to try and get yourself to change. That is very difficult, and some of them are even more difficult than that 60 days. What word choices do you want to use? What are your self definitions? And then finally, I want to give you an example of accountability. And that would be that weekly you could just do a simple thing of how many things did you say that you were going to do this week that you actually did? And what you were probably looking for in that is a number that's somewhere between 50 and 80%. Because if you accomplished everything you said you were going to do, you're probably not pushing yourself. If that's something that you're striving for, if that's part of your brand. And consider hiring a coach to help. Life coaches like me are specifically qualified to help you discover and explore who you are and who you want to be. You can decide on your own extrinsic branding opportunities and decide who that person in the mirror could be, but having someone hold you accountable to yourself could be a lifesaver. and I want to introduce something new um, to the channel. And this is an event that I'm really excited about. Let's see if I can do this here. I am creating a Game Changer Society. It's going to start in April. It's going to be $13 a week. There will only be 5 participants that are invited to be a part of this, and it will be for 10 weeks overall. And there will be cash prizes, rewards that have a monetary value of up to 125% of the cost. So, in other words, you could make back all of that money in rewards. And I will track everyone's weekly accountability goals and scores and help you attain that brand accountability that you may be striving for. If you want to join the GCS or the Game Changer Society, just send an email to me at daniel@connorscoaching.com. And the link for that is in the description for this video, but I'll also post I will post that in a comment to this video. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch this video and or to watch us live. I want to remind you that you can always subscribe to the channel, and then you have the ability to participate in our live chat. You can chat with me live while I'm broadcasting on Wednesdays at 3:30 p.m. If you have some extra time today, please consider taking a moment of your day to give back to this community with just 3 simple actions. Log into YouTube, subscribe to this video or subscribe to our channel, and to like this video. And if you want to go just a step further, I'll go back to my face now. If you want to go just a step further, you can leave us a comment to brighten our day and tell us what inspired you about our presentation today. I will see you next week at 3:30 p.m. on Wednesday with a guest who will be sharing his secrets for solo entrepreneurs and small business owners who want to sell their service without feeling like they're selling their immortal souls. And remember, together we inspire. I will see you then. Thank you. Bye.